hope you've been enjoying the Delaware Valley University Women's Summit thus far. We've been able to listen and learn from so many wonderful women out there that are sharing their expertise and their knowledge and are true trailblazers themselves. If you have seen me previously interviewing, that's great. But if this is the first time that you're hearing from me, my name is Sarah DeGeorge, and I'm here to talk to you about imposter syndrome and finding the power within. So a little bit about myself. I'm a digital marketing specialist. I've freelanced and have been self-employed since around 2012. My approach and focus are holistic approaches with social media, public relations, paid and organic marketing. So when I work with clients, we don't just focus in on one aspect of their digital marketing or any other factor in their marketing. We're looking at both the person. When I work with, say, a small business or a solopreneur, we want to know what is a sustainable approach of marketing for them. And we look at how that can manifest itself in the marketing. And we go from there and we build out a digital marketing strategy. So that's a little bit about what I do. And beyond that, my passions, of course, are animal welfare, volunteering, and why I'm here today, sharing my own experience through speaking and writing. Now, you might be wondering, well, what does imposter syndrome have to do with any of that? And I come here to say that I'm here to share my own experiences and stories with imposter syndrome, and also invite those who are listening in to think about your own stories and dialogue around imposter syndrome as well. I think collectively as women, many of us do have instances, some more than others, where we are suffering from imposter syndrome in our work, in our lives. So this discussion today is less about me talking to you about how one should go about working through imposter syndrome, and more of an open discussion where I hope my stories might bring out new clarity to you. And I implore you to have these discussions outside of this video as well with those that you trust about imposter syndrome, because so I hope that my experiences and some of the ideas that I will share with you today will help, and also make those out there who may be listening in and suffer from imposter syndrome feel less alone in it. So first and foremost, I think the biggest question is, what is imposter syndrome? So there is a definition which we will get to, but I would like to start by having you create your own definition. So what I'm going to say is, if you have a pen and a piece of paper around, that's great. If not, what I'm going to ask is, let's take 1 minute to produce our own definitions based on our personal experience with the feelings of imposter syndrome. So feel free to pause this video, grab your piece of paper and pen, and take 1 minute to produce your own definition based on your experience with imposter syndrome, and then we will come back. So with you having your definition down, the current definition of imposter syndrome. So it's the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. And the definition citation is there. This is definitely what I feel like is the discussion around imposter syndrome, and what a lot of people tend to come back to is just the persistent inability to believe that one is deserving of a position or is good enough at a, whether it is in their career or just in their own life. Are you a good friend? Are you a good spouse? So on and so forth. There's just this insidious thought that continuously comes into one's mind about, have I legitimately achieved this position, or do I feel like a fraud? And, when I wake up feeling like I don't belong here, or, people are going to find out that I'm a fake. And that's, I think, the hallmark idea around imposter syndrome, is just that continuous idea of not truly having been put in this position because of any sort of success, or it isn't deserved. And unfortunately, that is so persistent in so many lives, especially for the lives of women. I think one of the biggest stats that I've continuously seen come up, and I would like to share with you today, is that recent evidence suggests that approximately 70% of people will experience it, obviously it being imposter syndrome, at some point in their lives. So when you think about it, if you're in a room and there are 10 other people with you, this would suggest that 7 of those 10 people have or may be feeling some sort of imposter syndrome while you're all in the room together. It doesn't help because I feel as though imposter syndrome is not necessarily a topic we discuss openly, although I believe that we are starting to kind of turn the page where we are talking about these concepts, especially with anything regarding mental health, for example, and, emotions. We are discussing them a little bit more, but it's not something that we're all going to openly talk about. So if you're already feeling like you shouldn't be in the room, well, there might actually be more than half of the other population in that room feeling the exact same way, which showcases just how prevalent imposter syndrome shows up. Now, I will state that this is 70%. This is including both men and women, but it still showcases that a large percentage of our population is feeling this. And especially as women, I think we have all felt some sort of idea or shortcoming, as we network, as we are around other people that have similar backgrounds, but maybe we feel as though our background isn't as deserving as others, even though that is, of course, not true. And we all bring a special uniqueness. And, we've all, if we're in a position, we are deserving of it. So I think that it's an interesting statistic. Feel free to, of course, dive a little bit deeper if you are interested. So with that being said, I do want to touch on the idea of imposter syndrome and marginalized communities. When we think of imposter syndrome, there is this blanket statement that we kind of understand as just, again, the definition that I provided. But in certain circumstances, imposter syndrome is less of just feeling as though you don't belong with the credentials, but truly there not being a representation of specific communities in a specific organization or in any place in which you may be involved because of the lack of representation in marginalized communities. So according to Catalyst data, women in the US held about 26% of directorships, up from 20% in 2016, whereas obviously women in the UK had a slightly better percentage, around 30, almost 32%, up from 25. Additionally, though, women of color held 5% of US corporate board seats, despite being 18% of the US population. So what is this saying? A lack of representation, especially in marginalized communities, can make individuals feel as though they do not belong because they are not seeing individuals with their same lived experience in any sort of community that they may be in. And that's something that I think is really not discussed enough in imposter syndrome, is we have, again, this blanket idea, but that doesn't take the individual into account in some circumstances where it truly is the fact that this individual does not have representation. There are not other people who have gone through the oppression that they have gone through as well. And there is that lack of understanding, so when we discuss imposter syndrome, this needs to also be more of a nuanced discussion than just, oh, you're feeling imposter syndrome, or you're not feeling imposter syndrome. There also is a why, and that why can be very much so deep rooted in a lot of different situations that an individual may have been brought up in, just regular oppression, lack of representation, so on and so forth. So I would say this is an important part of the discussion where we need to look a little bit beyond just, oh, you feel like an imposter. And then there has to be, a why to that. And for some, that why is not necessarily from their self, but is from society and a lack of representation for them in any piece of or any group that they have been in. So I think that that's an important topic to touch on and discuss a little bit in deeper. capabilities with, say, those, that you are speaking with regarding imposter syndrome, or even like taking this conversation and having an open discussion with those around you as to how marginalized communities can be listened to more when it comes to imposter syndrome and why they are feeling the way that they are, with including, racism, bias, so on and so forth. There is a lot of deeper rooted issues in this conversation that need to be addressed and discussed. So I just wanted to point that out as an important piece of the discussion. So let's take it back. What drives imposter syndrome? So I'm going to say, have you heard yourself say this before? And these are, you may have just, said this to somebody, or you might have said it to yourself, thought it. I am not a good insert worker, daughter, partner, so on and so forth. I shouldn't be here. Everyone is smarter than me. I see no one who is a representation of who I am here, so I should not be here. I am too young, old to do or be this. I need to cancel. They are going to figure out I'm a fraud. Maybe I should just stay quiet. I probably don't have anything to add. I messed up. I'm a failure. If I do or say this certain thing, then people will think less of me or think I'm dumb. When I was thinking about these, and when I had asked others to throw in their reoccurring statement as to what comes up when they have imposter syndrome kind of creep into their mind, I was taken back, because I was like, I've heard myself say most of these statements, and I would assume that most people are nodding their head that at least one of these statements has come up in their life. And, as women, we're balancing so many different roles at home, at work, in our, social circles. Obviously, we're talking about this during COVID, so social circles may be more virtual at this point, but still coming together, you can always, assume that somebody is feeling, at some point like, oh, wow, these people have really good ideas, or I'm, not doing as much as this individual, so therefore I am no good. And of course, we know that that is not true, but it still comes up, unfortunately. Again, I'm gonna have that piece of paper and that pen taken out, and I want you, this would be on a separate piece of paper. I would ask for you to do. So not exactly what you already wrote down, but on a separate piece of paper. Again, take 1 minute, write down some typical things you hear your inner voice tell you that you feel is imposter syndrome speaking to you, and pause the video and we will come back. So I wanted to take this time not to just share my own stories, but to kind of connect with the idea of like, where does imposter syndrome stem from? Some people, it begins during certain periods of time. Some people have just always had certain circumstances that have just crept up in their lives, even from a young age, that have perpetuated that feeling of imposter syndrome. In my experience, even in this time when I'm speaking with you, like, I still feel imposter syndrome. I have felt imposter syndrome for a very long time. And obviously, when you're young, you don't really have a name for it. But I always felt like I didn't belong. And I wanted to showcase some of these stories very quick. They're high level. I didn't want any of these to be very triggering stories. So I wanted to keep them, a level in which I think others could understand without it being very emotional. So with that, I will say preschool swimming. I had an experience where I was put into a swimming class that I was not quite ready for yet. The kids were older than me, but I had no clue, and I was just trying my best. And in front of all of these other older kids, the instructor kept calling me out and making me feel like I was less than. I remember this so vividly, even as an adult, that I truly believe that this is just one of those first circumstances and situations where I just felt like, oh, wow, maybe I am not good at this and I shouldn't be here. Even though I was just a child trying to learn how to, swim and swimming lessons. This wasn't, I wasn't trying to be a part of the Olympic team. I was just trying to learn, but because I guess nobody had realized that I was most likely put into the wrong class. I wasn't quite there yet. I had this dialogue put into my head that I must not be, this isn't the place for me. And and I'm not, they're going to find out that I'm just no good. And it really carried on through my life. Elementary school, my self-worth, there was just, I know that that's a high level statement instead of an actual situation, but there were certain circumstances in elementary school where I just felt that the teachers made statements as to preferring this person to, say, myself, or I watched them, make statements of, oh, this individual is doing something really well, and then to the rest of us, even if it wasn't directly affected or directed at me, there was this kind of idea of like, okay, well, then something must be wrong with us. We must not be at that level. And so therefore we are less than. And obviously, I don't know what was going on in like these circumstances as a kid. I was still very young, but it was very instrumental in how I continued to feel about myself. I always was like, well, I don't think they like the way that I do things, or maybe, I'm a little bit quieter than, say, this individual who's more outspoken, and so like they would kind of succeed in things while I would feel like I was floundering. And it did kind of it that again, it was perpetuated again, and I had to work to kind of put my face out there and be like, hey, I'm here too. And then you question, you're like, am I just not good enough? High school sports, again, this might have been carried back from the swimming lesson experience, but I remember being on the soccer team tryouts, and I was so nervous to not make the team that I just was like, I'm just going to mess this up. So there's I will have perpetuated me not making the team. So I actually made sure that I tripped over my own 2 feet so that I would fall down and look inexperienced, just because I couldn't deal with the fact of just like not being in control of whether they liked me or not. And I was so afraid to have that kind of swimming experience again that I just botched the tryout. And I'll openly admit that now as an adult, but I was super embarrassed about it as, a high schooler. I did want to be on the sports teams, but I had just been so nervous about looking like any sort of an imposter or not being good enough that if I was at least in control of why they didn't choose me, that felt better than them saying no and me not knowing why. It would have just perpetuated it even more of my imposter syndrome with not having a clear idea. Although I could have asked, why I didn't make the team. College, majors. So we're getting closer to the current time. In college, I floated around with majors, and I've always wanted to help others. So my majors, of course, were education, psychology, nursing, and they were always so close to my heart, but I was so afraid to not do well in them that I feel like I floated around with majors for so long, and I could not just sit down. I was so afraid of failing. Again, going back to all this, because if I fail, then people are going to know that I'm a fraud and that like I was not good enough at any of the, the things that I thought I was good at. So I definitely danced around a lot of majors for a while. I obviously ended up with communications, and I work in digital marketing now, and I utilize, these opportunities to speak with others about, myself. And that's how I kind of have gone back to, caring for others and taking care of them. But it was just a long journey. And a lot of my inability to decide was not because I was indecisive. It was because I was just afraid of people thinking that I was not good enough, and then that would almost be my inner dialogue being pushed back to me with an outward, and then that would just devastate me if like the way that people viewed me was how I viewed myself. And last but not least, my career. And I'm still learning. And I think that's the thing, especially being self-employed. I'm talking to a lot of people. And if I'm for those that work in a, office job, you're also connecting with people, doing your work, so on and so forth. So with me, for clients and networking, there are still moments where I'm just like, I don't know the answer to this, which is fine. We are human. We will not always have the answer to everything, but there will still be moments where I'm like, am I good enough at what I do? And I have previous praise and I have recommendations and I have people that will speak on my behalf about my work and my work ethic. And it's still, I will question it because I don't have the answer, or um, I'm not able to, I have to ask for a little bit of extra time because, something came up, or, I wasn't handed a piece of information from X person in time. So that pushed the timeline off to deliver to Y person. So there's just a lot of different things, but it falls on my own lap sometimes in my own mind as to, am I good enough? Am I not good enough? Are people going to find out that actually I have no idea of what I'm doing, even though I have a lot of experience in what I'm doing? And it's just interesting how these, situations perpetuate themselves over and over and over again, and how sometimes you can kind of connect the dots, as I have in my life, as to different moments in which I felt imposter syndrome, but perhaps again, I didn't have the name for it when I was in preschool or elementary school or even high school, and probably even college. It's only until recently that, we've had this discussion about imposter syndrome, and it's become a little bit more of an open discussion amongst individuals, especially women. I speak with a lot of colleagues who have shared similar stories to my own. So when I heard similar stories, obviously with unique experiences attached to them, but the idea of just like not feeling as though, you are worthy, I was compelled to share these stories within this discussion as well. So I hope that hearing these, stories, I don't want to jog your memory to a time that was very, distressing to you, but perhaps this will also help connect the dots to your story as well. So how I work through imposter syndrome to finding the power within. Again, asterisk, I think we all still deal with it, even when we have kind of climbed up that mountain and we can see over that hump a little bit, and we can kind of come back saying, I do know what I'm talking about and I am worthy. But ways in which I work through imposter syndrome are, I just have to remember, this is something that I try to do. My own practice is, for every chance I shied away from, for all of the soccer tryouts I botched, even though it was only one, or, the majors that I flipped through. Well, I did say yes to things. I did it out of bravery. I remind myself of those moments of perseverance. And then you kind of think back like, well, and then you begin to trace those dots too. Well, why did I say yes to this? And why was I so nervous about that? What was the circumstances? Who were the people behind me? How was it brought up, in a way that made me feel strong, and empowered, and finding that, power within myself to say like, I can do this. Also, I began to realize I needed to surround myself with support. I take true account, obviously, into who I spend my time with, both personally and professionally. This isn't just, in my job. This is who I spend time with, because I really, it's important to surround yourself with people that are going to be that support system. I'm not saying that you need to have somebody that every time you're feeling down, you come to and they pour, they refill your cup for you, because you also do, if you can fill somebody else's cup, it's important that we're all building, each other, and like, not building each other up, but moving towards this collective goal that we all are rising together and we're all supporting each other. But it's really good to have that support system and those individuals that you can go to help you during those days, and that when they're having those days as well, you can help them as well. So again, it's not about finding this, eternally positive group. Everybody is going to have their bad days, their days when they're dealing with imposter syndrome, when you're dealing with imposter syndrome, but just a group that will be of support to you and that you can be of support to them. And lastly, I sought help to learn how to rewire negative talk and doubt into better outcomes. for those who, speak with somebody, a licensed, mental health professional, that has helped me. I realized that, for some individuals, there are price discrepancies, and like, pricing can be a little bit difficult when finding a professional. So I take that into account. And if not that, then just having somebody that could be a mentor to you, a trusted individual. It doesn't need to be at cost. It just needs to be somebody that can help retrain those thoughts and kind of keep you on task when it comes to, rethinking about how you think about yourself. And when that imposter syndrome comes in, how can we change this dialogue? So I wanted to add in some quick tips to help you work through imposter syndrome. These are just a few things that I keep around that I hope might be of some sort of help to you, and feel free to add in your own twist to them and add these to practices you already have. But I create a win sheet. A win sheet is basically something in which I can go back to. And it doesn't have to be just one single sheet. It could just be, I have a file of things people have said over the years that have been praised. I have a few starred emails of individuals who have said, wow, great work, or you did really great on this project, or I'm really grateful to have you as a friend, even things of that nature on both the personal and professional, to be able to get me through days in which I'm not feeling the greatest, or I'm feeling as though maybe I'm not worthy. And I hope that, they have to be easily accessible to make sure, because sometimes you really do need them, and it's great to have them within an easy access point. The next is practice constant retraining of negative talk into positive. And this takes work. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's super easy and you're going to say it once and it's going to stick. It's going to be a constant, practice. So if you hear yourself saying, I'm not good at whatever that is, then list all the proof that you are good at that. An example is, I messed up on this project last week. Could be reframed to, I may have made a mistake, but I have also successfully hit all major metrics in the last year and have been given XYZ praise for it. And this is also time to refer back to the win sheet as well. Create small but meaningful goals to hit. I think this is also something, because when we can't hit those major goals, then that's when the imposter syndrome comes in. I can't scale this mountain. It's so insurmountable. But maybe just getting to these little peaks are ways in which you're still getting to that larger goal, but you're taking it in smaller bite-sized goals, which can also help kind of keep the imposter syndrome at bay, because you are still accomplishing something that is working towards that high level goal. So if you feel that larger goals are keeping you from feeling worthy, then break them down. So an example of this could be, I am struggling as a mother to balance work, childcare, and any chores I need to get done. Therefore, I shouldn't be a mom. Not true. This could be reframed into smaller micro goals. Pick one or two things most important to you that day, such as family time, a cooked meal, clean laundry, or even finishing your work and your career by a specific time, if possible. If you accomplish these attainable goals, then you can celebrate those wins. And you know what? This is all working towards the goal of keeping things organized, of balancing your work and taking care of your children. I know we're all at home right now, and this can be a major stressor. And also, again, the imposter syndrome creeping in, making these little goals. You're like, well, I did my work. The children are fed. I was able to get some laundry done, and that's it for my day. And everything else can then be moved to another day. Albeit there are obviously some times in which random things happen and things get shifted a little bit, but it's just retraining that, like, the big goal is not the main goal. It's something you can work towards, but break it down, and that can help make imposter syndrome a little bit harder to creep into your mind, because you will say, I did these tasks that I told myself I would do. So continuing the work and helping others. It's not so much just about yourself too. It's also, there are others around. And while we are kind of the idea of like, you need to make sure that your glass is full before you start pouring into others, there are ways in which I feel like collectively, even if we are all on this journey together to work through imposter syndrome, we can do small but meaningful efforts to help others, as they are suffering from imposter syndrome as well. So first, utilize your experience to help guide others or offer a listening ear. If somebody needs advice, if there is something, again, like how I just shared, the win sheet and retraining, that's one option. Or just to listen. Some people just need somebody to listen as they are working through a bout of imposter syndrome, or they're just feeling like they need to get those words out into the world, somebody to hear. That's one way to give back. If you are in a position of power or authority, use that opportunity to help provide opportunity to others who may be marginalized. Again, going back to this discussion, give them the opportunity to be heard and supported in their endeavors. This is a perfect opportunity. If you are in a position where there is a little bit more power and authority for you, and you're realizing that populations are not being listened to, or they don't have the representation they need, let this be the opportunity where you can bring them into the discussion, where you can step aside and let them lead the discussions, and listen and implement from what they are telling you. This is important because this builds a lot of equity as well that we need to bring into both personal and professional circumstances, and can definitely be of benefit to those in marginalized communities suffering from imposter syndrome as well, because they will get the opportunity to speak, and hopefully the implementation of representation as well. And lastly, offer support in the form of recommendations, referrals, or reviews to help those have their wins list. So if you could be somebody who could build out somebody else's wins list while you're building your own, that's also, that can help in so many different ways, just from having the win sheet to also being a voice for if somebody needs a reference, or if they need somebody to recommend them for any sort of situation. This is a major way in which we can all give back to each other and build, each other up from feeling as though we are an imposter. So let's end with some positivity. We're at the end of the discussion. What I want you to do on a separate piece of paper than you've already been writing on is take 1 minute to write down kind things about yourself. Start with I am statements you wish you could tell yourself more regularly. And with that being said, pause the video and we will come back. So take in what you are hearing, internalize it, and remember that you can find the power within yourself to hear these voices more regularly. I know it sometimes can feel difficult, but if we all build out these practices and listen to others and implement in these new ways in which of listening and providing equity and inclusivity, we can build out a better reality, and hopefully that 70% of the population begins to go down because we're building each other up and listening and implementing. So lastly, crumble up that negative self-talk paper you wrote earlier and place it in the trash. Throw those thoughts away. They're no longer important and they don't define who you are. I really want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope that you are able to take away some valuable information, or at least relate to some of the things I talked about. Again, this is an important discussion because I think as women, we do carry a lot on our shoulders, and each woman is different based on their own circumstances. So I hope that you're able to learn, implement, and grow from this discussion, and you'll be able to help others as well. I hope you have a great day.